Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to help you understand how to explain the formation of a waterfall. And there are two particular steps in this task. The first one is where you are going to draw a sequence, that means more than one, diagrams which are going to be annotated. And that these diagrams will help explain the processes, and that's a key point, that will result in the formation of the river feature known as a waterfall. So you have to remember from our previous landscape feature, the V-shaped valley, that annotating means doing more than just labeling. A sequence of diagrams are required because you need more than one to show the series of steps that have to occur. That the processes, that refers to the different types of erosion that are occurring and where you explain what they are, and that will give you the formation of the waterfall. Now, the diagrams is one form of answering this question. The second task will be where you use my descriptions to help explain all of those steps, but instead of using diagrams, you just use words. And at the end of this, when you turn to the page that's got this question, you'll be asked to write an exam question worth 10 marks where you sequence all of those steps together. Okay, so let's have a look at the waterfall itself. Okay, so the waterfall, first of all, is a vertical drop in the course of the river. Okay, and it primarily occurs because the river has crossed from a rock, one type of rock, which generally could be any rock, but it has to be harder than the rock it's crossing onto, which in this case would have to be softer. Okay, so when a river's traveling across a landscape and it suddenly changes from a hard rock to a soft rock, then the waterfall is going to form. And you can actually see in the diagram, or I should say in the photograph, that the rock has changed, that the rock up here is different from the rock down here. So this could be, for example, a limestone or a sandstone, which would be maybe slightly softer than the harder rock down here, which could be a whinstone or a granite. Okay, so that's just showing you the processes that are at play here, that the river's changing from one rock to another, and that's a really key important point in explaining waterfalls. One additional feature that occurs when waterfalls form is that over time, waterfalls actually move backwards up their valleys because they're eating backwards into the landscape, and therefore create what we can see in this diagram is a steep-sided, vertical-sided gorge, or its actually technical name is a gorge of recession. So we've got these steep cliff shapes. The waterfall is actually moving backwards in this photograph over time. So a few hundred years ago it would have been down here and it's gradually moved back and it's created this really steep-sided valley known as a gorge. All right, let's get going with what we need to know. So we're creating, just like we did with the V-shaped valley, a series of diagrams. Each diagram takes us forward one step in understanding the development of the waterfall. And we need to add annotations, and we can see we've got some annotations here. These aren't the ones I'm going to use, but this is just to show you what it looks like. What you now need to do is get a sheet of A4 paper. It can be lined or blank. You want to give it a title, like the formation of a waterfall, and you're going to be drawing 4 diagrams onto that sheet of paper. So I suggest you pause it now, get that piece of paper, and now that we are ready to go ahead and look at the 4 steps. So in your first quarter of your piece of paper, you're going to want to draw step 1, our first diagram in this sequence. So what have we got? Well, my diagram is trying to show a soft rock sitting on top of a harder rock. Okay, a harder rock sitting on top of a soft rock. So I'm going to call this my hard rock. Now I'm going to want to annotate it because I want to say something about this. So up here, I'm going to want to write that this is a harder, more resistant rock that's going to erode at a much slower rate due to river erosion. For example, and let's give an example of a really hard rock like whinstone, or you could write granite. It is sitting on top of a soft rock. Now we want to annotate that. This is a less resistant rock, less resistant. And you're going to say a little annotation that says it's going to be erode at a faster rate than the rock sitting above it because it's a softer, less resistant rock. Okay? And the final bit in your diagram is this point here that you want to annotate, that this is a point in the river where the river crosses from a harder rock to a softer rock. We also need to actually say what this is. So this is just a simple label. This is our river. Okay. Now let's just add one additional piece of annotation. So up here we can say that because the river is in the mountain stage, there are large gravitational forces pulling the river downwards to erode vertically into the landscape. So it's eating downwards. Most of the energy is being exerted vertically into the landscape. So we have vertical erosion due to being high in the mountains with a lot of gravitational pull. Other key thing is it's on a steep gradient which increases the rate of vertical erosion that will be happening. So all along this particular area here, there's going to be a high level of river erosion due to vertical erosion. You don't need to actually put these dashes in, but that's just to illustrate what's happening. Right, so that's your first step. You should have the diagram drawn with these key annotations. Right, let's just pause there for a second. And now we're going to move on to step 2. So step 2 is just developing this diagram a little bit further forward. So I'm just going to add something here which I'll then remove. That's the previous diagram. And now this area that is red has now been eroded away. I'm just going to take that back out of my diagram because what am I showing? Well, I've got my river, but I don't need to add a label because I have that on my previous diagram. So the person looking at my diagram knows that. I've got my soft and my hard rock here and here, but I don't need to say anything more about that because I've already dealt with those two. Okay. So let me just rub that out. Right. What are we wanting to know? Well, the first annotation we need to add is here, that a vertical drop in the river develops over time as the softer rock, I beg your pardon, that should say soft. Okay, these are the wrong way around and I apologize for that. As the softer rock erodes at a faster rate. Okay, and that is going to increase, and you can add this to your annotation, the processes of erosion, especially in this area where the water is now dropping. Okay, I'll talk more about process of erosion in a second in my third diagram. But this second diagram is just, the key thing is your annotation to show that we have increased, we have a vertical drop developing in our river due to increased processes of erosion occurring where the river's gone from one rock to the second rock. Okay, let's go on to step 3. Okay, now you want to draw the diagram. I've got getting my hard and soft the wrong way around again. I apologize for that. There's my hard, there's my soft. Now this is the critical diagram. This is where you're going to add most of your information and where you'll pick up most of your marks. Okay, so we now have a vertical drop in the river. And what's now happened is a overhang has developed. Okay, now your annotation to this overhang is that this is a part of the river that's no longer supported by the rock underneath, and therefore it's starting to weaken and it's going to collapse. So what I'm saying is this section is not supported and will collapse. But okay. Second thing is we now have a huge amount of energy of water crashing down off our vertical drop. So our next label is down here. We're going to have a high rate of abrasion happening. Now, abrasion is a process of erosion that occurs in a river where rocks in the river are moving and they wear away at the bed of the river. Now, because there's lots of rocks building up in this plunge pool, which is another label I want to add, these rocks are being moved by the turbulent water, leading to an increased rate of abrasion in this area here. So you'd want to make sure you have that explanation for why abrasion is happening here, because all these rocks that are in the plunge pool are now being moved by the water and it's increasing the rate of erosion. And you've got to tell me that abrasion is where rocks in the river are scraping away at the bed of the river. And the back wall, you've got a lot of spray, and you can see it just there coming off the river from the water that's cascading down. That leads to a huge amount of hydraulic action. So this is where the power of the water gets into cracks in the base of the river and causes the air in those cracks to expand, putting pressure on those cracks and weakening them further. So it's the power of water further eroding that. If you want an explanation for hydraulic action, you should have actually had it at the start of this topic. So we have an increased rate of hydraulic action at the back of our waterfall. we've got that now mentioned. We've got abrasion happening at the base of our waterfall, and we've explained what that is. We've explained what the overhang is. Okay. And that brings us to our final step in the river, explaining the waterfall, which is where the overhang eventually collapses because it is unsupported, because the rock underneath it has been eroded away. Okay, so this is the hard rock again, just to remember. And you want to explain that that's now dropping. So that's no longer there. Obviously, when the overhang collapses, lots of rock gets added to the base of the plunge pool, which further increases the rate of abrasion. Okay. And the process is going to repeat all over again. The hard rock is going to be undercut again. And eventually over time, this will get further and further back. Okay. And the waterfall will actually begin to retreat upstream. The waterfall, so you'd want to write this down, the waterfall is going to retreat upstream, creating a gorge of recession. Now, if you listen back to everything I've said, you want to connect all of that, not just draw, if you've drawn all 4 diagrams with all of the annotations, with all of the explanations I've offered, you would be getting full marks, up to potentially 10 marks for this. If you are trying to answer this question, you now also have to take all of my sequence of events to explain how the waterfall is actually created. So you actually got 2 answers, one where the diagram tells you what's going on, and on the following page, one where you write a full explanation, and you're going to be marked out of 10 for that. So that concludes my tutorial on explaining how a waterfall forms using diagrams, and also how to write an answer.